So make sure you're in the picture.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Evening, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Meeting of the Council and Committee for the Town of Petawawa for May 13th, 2024. Welcome to members of council, staff, and our audience here this evening, as well as all of you at home watching from the comfort of your own home. We'll start our meeting off by reading the land acknowledgement, and tonight it's Councillor Coutu who will read the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Mayor Service. As we gather this evening, I would like to acknowledge on behalf of the Petawawa Town Council and our community that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We would like to thank the Algonquin people and express our respect and support for their rich history. We are extremely grateful for their many and continued displays of friendship. We also thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years, and we wish to acknowledge our shared responsibilities in responding to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission 94 calls to action. Tonight, I'll be reading call to action number 9. We call upon the federal government to prepare and publish annual reports comparing funding for the education of First Nations children on and off reserves, as well as educational and income attainments of Aboriginal peoples in Canada compared with non-Aboriginal people. Indigenous Services Canada is continuing to review and update public reporting on education funding, including to better implement this call to action. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coutu. And just before we get underway, I'd also like to bring to everybody's attention that May is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And we here in the town of Petawawa have raised a We Stand With Survivors banner on the side of the Petawawa Civic Center. And just to let you know that this campaign serves as an integral part in raising awareness and support for survivors, and also as a show of solidarity between the town and the survivors. Crimes like these are often difficult for survivors. There's sometimes a tendency to be afraid to report them. So we want to make sure that by raising this banner, we bring awareness to the survivors, that we hear them, we believe them, and that we care, and that we want to give them an opportunity to come forward. So just to let you know, the Petawawa is committed to standing with survivors, and that banner will be up all throughout the month of May. Okay, is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest on any of this evening's matters? No presentations. So we'll start with our community services report for the month of April 2024. And Mary, good evening.
Good evening. Okay, so we had a safe arena refrigeration plant owner operator course run by the Ontario Recreation Facilities Association. We had attendees from our community services department, the fire department, the CAO, and the mayor were in attendance. This training kind of covers the legislation and operating best practices, maintenance, like the importance of having a good maintenance plan, record keeping, ensuring that you have competent staff operating, and the importance that in terms of like budget, in terms of the people that have the decision-making powers over the budget, understand the risk and liability of operating a plant, because it's kind of a dangerous facility to be operating. So just bringing that knowledge to our staff and to the people that have the financial decision-making power. We also brought in Mark Lambert from AGCO to do a training session with our staff on risk and liability for serving alcohol on our premises, so that our facility operators, who are kind of the managers on duty for most of the events where alcohol is being served, are aware of their responsibility as the managers on duty. We also had a very busy month with hiring. We did a lot of interviewing in the month of April. We have now hired 2 new facility operators. One is to replace Calvin's position since he has been promoted, and to fill a maternity leave placement. So we had Miles Anna join us in April and Stefan Chartron will be joining us in May. We also had Kat Moore, who is one of the cleaners at the Civic Center. She also is doing a part-time role as a policy and grants coordinator for the Community Services Department. We also hired Ellie Dumishfeld, who will be starting in June as our tourism officer, and Joe Mick, who will be starting after the long weekend in May as a recreation programmer. As well, we did interviews for facility operator assistants, beach attendants, and summer camp staff. So lots of new people coming on board. Then we had our regular programs, Cooking It Forward. There was a Trails to Tranquility. It was a guided birthday hike and journal event in the Petawawa Terrace. We also did a community cleanup for Earth Day, and there was a really good turnout for that. It was at the Civic Center grounds and Limestone Park. Some of the events that were coming up for the month of May include Hell or High Water that just happened this past weekend. Next week, we will be hosting the Specialist High Skills Major class from Valor for a day where we give them a problem that they have to hack that's related to the services of recreation and sport in the community. And then we're also working in coordination with Community Futures Development Corporation to host a ANCA compliance workshop. It's a workshop your bylaws session, so that's going to be at the end of the month. We had Colin attending a couple different trade shows in the month of April. He was also a speaker at the OBTA AGM, and he was the recipient, or the town was the recipient of the MyFan Event of the Year Spirit Awards for Water and Dirt. I don't know if you guys want the certificate and the record here. And then we just had our regular rentals and the Earth Day awareness flag. My report.
Thank you, Mary, and congratulations to you and your staff and to Colin for our award on the Water and Dirt Festival. I recognize and watch each year as it grows and grows and becomes not only a big part of our town, but the entire county. So it's always exciting to see how it expands and where it's going and what new events are coming. That's a big highlight for everybody in Petawawa and the county as a whole. Okay, questions on the report or comments? Councilor Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick comment. Just like to see with the new hirings, some of the names that I used to work with the Civic Center, Miles and Ellen, I think they will do very well. Glad they came back to the town of Petawawa and worked, and hopefully they stick around for a long time. Thanks.
We're excited to have them.
Any other questions or comments on the report? Just like to point out maybe, and maybe you can back me up on this, but it's probably good to have an HR coordinator with all these hirings and interviews and things going on to take it off of our regular staff's plate to allow you to do your job.
Jody is the best. Very excited to have her.
Okay, if there are no further questions, I need a motion to accept the report. Moved by Councillor Driscoll, seconded by Councillor Roos, that the Community Services monthly report for April be accepted as information. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
Next, we'll go to the Fire Department. Acting Chief Prue to present the report for April 2024.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, members of council. The report for April, we had 17 incidents. We had 2 chimney fires due to blocked chimneys. We had 2 faulty smoke alarm detectors. We had a grass fire on Highland Park Drive that could possibly have been due to some kids in the area. We had 2 burning without a permit. Written warning was issued, and we couldn't find the cause from Petawawa Boulevard, but we have a good idea it's probably children again. We had carbon monoxide due to a furnace issue alarm. We had 2 calls for tree on Hydro Line on Levine and Goodsman, but a smell of smoke at a residence. And we had 3 fire alarms that we responded to. One was cooking, one was for false alarm, and one was due to a technician working on the system. We had a flooded home. We had a shed fire. It was quite a large shed that started catching on to the residents, but the crews were able to suppress it before it actually caused more damage. We had a motor vehicle collision out in Barron Canyon Road on the 30th of April. For fire prevention, our inspectors were busy this month with 53 inspections, inspecting complaints and requests. We had 2 charges laid with 2 residents. And for the fire prevention, we attended some blocked fire exits at the Civic Center. The inspectors went in to check the first sleepover at Norman Bank Hall, and then we attended booths at the showcase event on the 26th, 7th, and 8th, and assisted with a fire safety plan. To date, we've checked 39 homes with CO and smoke alarms, and our recreational permits started at 890, and we're at 902 for the end of the month. For training, our crews completed wildland scenarios, deploying hose lines, nursing vehicles, fireground communication, situational awareness while operating in the bush. We did some specialty training. Our crews restarted on live fire training on April 13th, 23rd, and 23rd, where we had 26 people attend to go through the nozzle techniques, the primary searches, hydraulic ventilation, and interior attack on our new sea containers, which was very well received. For maintenance, we just had minor checks with the trucks. One front end on 9621, which we had an incident with, was completed, and then annual checks on the other equipment. We had a door at Station 1 that was repaired, and the heating and air conditioning units were all serviced. And for the acting chief's comments, we attended the master fire plan on the 5th, also the senior management meeting on the 5th. On the 12th, myself and the chief fire inspector attended the training that Mary was talking about at the Civic Center for the refrigeration training. We development charges review meeting. I met with Chief Sell on the 17th to discuss the aerial apparatus agreement, and Assistant Deputy Chief not attended the recruitment meeting with the HR coordinator. And that is my report for April.
Thanks, Greg. Questions on the report? Councillor Roots.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Greg, how did that meeting go then with the fire chief Sell then? Is there things you can share with us?
We just basically chatted about what would be in the agreement for cost wise, and the agreement they completed. It's in our hands right now. We're reviewing it right as we speak, and then we should have something shortly. So it looks pretty positive, but it will definitely be a big help once we get that on board.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Greg.
Further questions on the fire report? I'd just like to say thanks to Acting Chief Prue and all of your department for allowing me to take part in the live fire training in the containers. It was a little hot in there, I must say, but it was interesting to see what you and your crew have to go through for training, and how important it is to have the live fire training to teach them what it's like to go into an actual fire. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said that only the garrison and CNL in the county have a similar type of facility. So it's great that we have it and can offer our volunteer firefighters that type of training for sure. And I just want to compliment you and your entire group there and your professionalism and strict focus on safety. Like from start to finish, it was very professional. Made me feel comfortable enough to get in a burning sea container. So thanks for that.
Thank you. And, our crew really appreciates the support with the containers. I got to go in it as well and work with the crews, and it's amazing to see with our thermal imaging cameras, seeing the heat coming through, which is a great indicator for our crews on what could be coming. And I've worked in a lot of large burn towers, and you don't get that fire behavior and dynamics as quick as what we have in the container. So it's actually an excellent training aid for our crews. But I'm glad that you came out and was able to experience the 800 degrees Fahrenheit heat.
Any further questions or comments? Then I need a motion to accept the report. Moved by Councillor Roots, seconded by Councillor Driscoll. That the fire department activity report for April be accepted as information. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you.
Next, we have finance and management. Christine, I hope you had a good holiday. You're back refreshed and ready for it.
Obrigada, see.
So I guess we're starting right in with FIN-07-2024, electronic funds transfer resolution and policy. Fire away.
Yes, so I'll preface this report and policy, as one of the goals for the finance department, and the organization as a whole is of course modernization. And, as the mayor and deputy mayor can acknowledge that there are a lot of checks that need to be signed. So in conversation with our, banking partner TD, they require a resolution, to be passed by council or the board, to acknowledge or sign up for these banking services, which brought me down the path of, we should probably have a policy for that, not only for, just for a staff and policy procedure in place, but also in discussion with our insurance provider with respect to, fraud and cybersecurity risks. Having a policy that outlines what we will do to maintain, security as well as authenticate, any changes in banking information. As you're well aware, that's in the news, especially with municipalities, but any organization is exposed to those risks. So the report just brings forward or highlights the policy as well as the required resolution from TD. So it's kind of a two-in-one report. So I won't go through it all, but I'm happy to answer any other questions in regards to either the resolution or the policy put forward.
Do we want questions right away, or are you going to give us a little bit of a background?
Yeah, I think just in the report, as I noted, with the volume of checks, so there's over 7,000 checks. There were 7,000 checks issued last year requiring dual signature. So the focus, we won't be paying everybody through EFT. We are actually using EFT right now for online banking payments when it comes to accepting of tax payments per se. But again, this is just to acknowledge that we do them, what we do to authenticate money coming in, but more importantly, the money going out as it relates to payroll, as it relates to vendors. So we'll be focusing, we're not going to go 100% full force with EFTs right off the bat. We're going to be focusing on the low dollar, high volume transactions such as hydro and utilities, the ones that have actually been begging us to sign up for EFT online payments. So cell phones or Bell, those types of vendors. So we're going to start small and roll it out with the ones that are causing us the most pain, as well as the vendors the most pain too, as it relates to payments.
Okay, thanks for that. Questions on the report? I just have one quick one. So obviously it's not going to be 100%. We're still going to have to sign a few checks. Can you give us an example of some of the checks that we might still be signing?
Yeah, so if, let's say we take out the hydro and the Bell, so there will still be some smaller vendors, for example, that don't or are unable still to accept EFT. And so the plan over time will be to migrate as many as possible to EFT. But vendors that don't accept EFTs, or those ones where I guess that's pretty much it. But that will take time because we don't want to just roll it out to every single vendor there is, because we will need to start gathering banking information from those vendors. So you'll still be sending checks for a while. They won't be completely eliminated, but at least from a volume perspective, they will decrease. And with that, again, our paper costs, postage costs, time costs will also decrease as well.
Thanks. And I've noticed there's a small savings in terms of what it was costing us to sign the checks, put them in envelopes, mail them, and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. I guess the only other question I have is, we have employees with the town of Petawawa who have EFTs for their salary, mm-hmm. but often we sign checks for mileage or daily stipend or other items like that. Is this going to give us the ability to do EFTs for everything concerning our employees?
I guess, pain point, if you will, isn't necessarily an EFT or banking issue. It's more so of a software issue. So our current financial system, I believe there is the functionality, it just hasn't been set up yet. But we are doing a full evaluation of our financial software provider, because that's not the only quote unquote pain point that we have with the system. So that's a different fish to fry.
All right, any other questions? Okay, so I need a motion to approve. You see there's two motions there. That the resolution attached to this report, TD Online Banking Resolution, be approved, and that the proposed bylaw attached to the report be approved as well. Moved by Deputy Mayor Sabrin, seconded by Councillor Carmody, that the resolution attached to this report, TD Online Banking Resolution, be approved, and that the proposed bylaw attached to this report be approved as presented at the next meeting of council. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried. My wrist is feeling a little better already. Not going to be as many checks. Okay, next we'll go to FIN-08-2024 Debt Management Policy. Christine.
Yes, so as part of our budget deliberations, there were or are two projects on the table that council approved to be financed through debt, with the asterisk or condition beside it that a debt management policy be brought forward before entering into any debt agreements. So this policy is the first kick at the can, so to speak. I've gone through and reviewed other municipalities' debt policies, two within Renfrew County and others outside of the region. I'm a big believer in, yes, looking at what others are doing within Renfrew County, just because we are in close proximity, but looking elsewhere and outside of Ontario, the larger municipalities, even smaller municipalities, to look at from a best practice, as well as looking at, so there's municipal organizations such as MFOA, GFOA, just to give you a sense of the breadth as well as the depth of the resources that have been researched and reviewed to draft this policy before you. So on the second page of the report, I tried to summarize the key findings or key bullet points or recommendations, if you will, that are contained within the policy. Policy can be quite dry, but that's what I'm here for. So the highlights, there's the annual repayment limit. So that's any debt and interest payments need to be less than 25% of revenues, municipal revenues. And I am proposing a self-imposed limit of only 15%. So not all municipalities have that, but given our financial stability, our ability to plan, as well as give us that 10% of buffer room in the case of emergencies, so that either this council or future councils, this policy can obviously be amended, or council can supersede that in the case of an emergency, whether that be for water or significant infrastructure projects. So that 10% is meant to be the true emergency fund in the case it needs to be called upon. And then also there was a wider range of debt financing usage. Some municipalities restricted the types of assets, breaking down the dollar limit by the category of asset. In the proposed policy, it's meant to focus on service improvements and life cycle projects, especially growth projects too, as we know the town is growing. And then thresholds on the following page. The minimum project cost would be $1 million. I believe that anything under $1 million, we should be able to plan for, save for, or fund through other means such as grants and other items. So that's your floor. And it must have a minimum useful life of 10 years, and then minimum debt financing is 5 years. So there are situations where we could go 5 years, and for this budget, for the two capital projects included in the budget, 5, 10, 15 years, but the maximum will be 30. The Municipal Act does set a maximum of 40 years. But again, a self-imposed lower limit of 30 years. So I've kind of taken the bounds of what the Municipal Act permits us to do, taken a look at what other municipalities have proposed, and kind of shrunk the box for us to work with, just to be on the conservative side. Obviously, again, this is a policy that can be amended, like I said at the beginning, first kick at the can. But it's meant to be a conservative and smart approach to debt financing, especially since this municipality hasn't seen debt in a very long time. The other items, the non-tax supported activities, those just speak to the fact that we have a water and sewer fund, and those items should be allocated appropriately. So if we have, let's say, Wolf Street as an example, the water fund and sewer funds should be funding their debt proportion. So if the water project, or if the water portion, excuse me, of the Wolf project costs 30%, then the water fund will cost 30%, or will pay for 30% of the debt costs. So just to allocate it out proportionately, so that it's not just the ratepayers that will be funding it. It will also be the water and sewer, the actual users as well from that perspective. So allocating it out between the funds. And then inter-fund borrowing, I've already committed myself to future work with a reserve and reserve fund policy. Borrowing, this is meant to be for external borrowing, whereas reserve and reserve fund policy addresses internal borrowing. So for example, if we wanted to borrow from the water fund to finance different projects, that should be covered under a different policy. So I've done my best to summarize the highlights and the key components. To summarize the policy, the items that I haven't really touched on just now are kind of the legalese, the roles and responsibilities, the definitions. They're what should be contained in every debt policy. So I'm happy to take any questions now.
Okay, thanks, Christine. I think it's a great step for the municipality. We have had taken on debt in the past, not to any extremes, but there has been some debt. So I think it's important now that we have taken on or have decided to take on some debt to have a policy in place to ensure that this year and in the years moving forward, that there are some parameters that are set out, and it'll help us during budget time as well, should we be considering debt in the future. So I think it's great to have this, but I'm sure there'll be some questions. So we'll start with Deputy Mayor Sarburn and then Councillor Carney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Christine. I think it's a good policy. I've always been debt averse, and I think that the history of council has been debt averse as well, except under certain conditions. The reality, however, is that costs are rising, expectations are increasing, and we can't do it all on taxpayer dollars annually and still keep up the level of service that our community not only expects but deserves. I like the self-imposed restrictions. I think it's more important to start with restrictions and look at perhaps easing those restrictions or whatnot, since I do maintain a crawl, walk, run type of an approach to many things in my life. So I'm very pleased with that. Could you just give me an example? And this might not be a fair question for you. So off the top of your head, if you can recall what our revenues are this year, 15%, if our revenues are something like $10 million, 15% would be, and that way we're communicating it to our public as well. This is kind of what it looks like in dollars and cents for this year, could be the maximum, if you could.
I'm good with my computer here, so I can pull up the spreadsheets. I'll use 2023 estimated revenue numbers. We have a full year as an example. So for 2023, it's net own source revenues. So grant revenue, for example, would not be included. It's what we can generate ourselves. So 2023 estimated revenue was $23.8 million. Our debt obligations for 2023 were about $75,000. So our annual repayment limit of 25% would work out to close to $6 million. So we would have up to $6 million to put towards debt and interest, but that's 25%. So if I multiply that by 15, oh, sorry. So we've got a lot of, I'll leave it at, we've got a lot of room to work with. So that 75K was only 0.3% out of the 25 ARL legislated limit. And again, in the policy, it does point out that for every budget process or deliberation, the Director of Finance Treasurer is required to give council an update, as well as anytime there is a new debt agreement brought forward in terms of what that ARL impact will be. Just again, to be well informed when making that decision. And I will circle back to the mayor's comment. I did find the bylaw where the town last took on debt. And the report was a legal opinion saying the municipal act permits you to, so do it. So having this policy in place, providing us with that framework and guidance going forward, it just makes sense.
Follow-up question?
Thank you. And just a comment. I like the fact that we've got those checks and balances in place so that there's a report. This is where we're currently at. This is what it means, et cetera, et cetera. So it allows us to make the best decisions for the use of our funds. Thank you very much for your work on this. I appreciate it.
Councillor Kerman.
Thank you, Mayor Service, and thanks for the report, Christine. All very good. Just a question about the annual debt repayment limit of 15%, and with our current proposed debt that we're about to undertake, this for 2024, where does that put us with respect to that 15%? How close are we getting to that 15%?
I just again updated the numbers, so we would be that 15% of call it $24 million of revenue would put us at 3.5 or $3.6 million, and that is just for your annual debt and interest payments. So not the total amount of debt that you're taking on. So if we were to borrow $4 million, it would just be what's the annual repayment for those two loans. So I can't really tell you because we haven't agreed upon, or council hasn't approved. Is it a 5-year loan? Is it a 10-year loan? The interest rates are quite in flux right now. I've been tracking them. They are from Infrastructure Ontario. They range from 4.5% up to 5%, depending on the loan duration. So I can't give you a number right now, but I can provide one. I can give that number later.
Okay, so thank you for that answer. So presumably this annual debt repayment limit will be quite fluid then. It will change according to, there's a number of things that could affect that, including, of course, the amount of revenue that we're generating year over year and the amount that we paid down the debt and what's going on with interest rates. So this limit will be something that will need to be tracked, I guess, at budget time, where they'll have to pick up a point in time and say, okay, as a certain date, that's what it was.
Yes, so the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing requires, as part of the financial information return, for us to file. It's again a massive spreadsheet that they calculate our ARL. So from a revenues perspective, yes, it will fluctuate based on our revenues. But once we lock into any sort of debt obligation, assuming it is an amortizing debt agreement, those amounts are locked in for the duration. So we lock in at 4.5% per se for 10 years. We know what those numbers are going to be for the next 10 years. It's more so that's the Y variable. The X variable is our revenues. Yes.
Good, thanks.
Further questions? Councillor Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a little clarification. I just want to say I do like the report and I do like our policy. When you were talking about the waters, they say with wool, Is the debt servicing cost going to be shared amongst the users of the water service, or is it going to be shared across all ratepayers in municipality, whether they use water and sewer services?
So we'll use Wolf as the example. So if just 30% is water, 30% is sewer, and then 40% is just the road infrastructure, let's say. Then the 40% would be allocated to kind of our capital budget. So kind of our transportation capital budget allocation, and then the 30% for water will be paid by the water fund, and then 40% will be paid by the sewer fund. So it's kind of allocated out to, if you think of I guess a normal ratepayer, they would be paying their water and sewer fees and then their property taxes. So 40% of their property taxes, and then it would be allocated towards Wolf, 30% water, but the water and sewer fees, those fees would be used to fund those debt costs. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, so essentially, if you use water and sewer, you'll be servicing the debt for the water and sewer, but if you don't use it, you will not be servicing that debt, or just for the water and sewer, but for
Correct.
the roadway you build.
Yeah, so for example, if there's a user that's on a more rural road who's on well and septic, they would only be funding the 40% of the Wolf project.
Okay, very nice.
Councillor Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just looking at the policy, Christine, that you put out with regards to Parastat and policy requirements. You start off with limitations on debt. So third point down, catch up.
Yes.
So the town shall limit. The fourth point has the treasurer shall have the authority to change the above application of debt financing. Looking at the 3 points above, there's growth projects, service improvement, and life cycle items. So in reference, what would we be considering an idea or an example of something that you might have the authority to change?
So in that case, so for example, I'll keep going back to the Wolf project, because that is one of the projects that is allocation for debt. So in that case, it's more so in terms of, okay, it's more of the allocation in terms of, if I'm thinking more of a scenario where it's not 100% fully funded by debt. So if there's cost savings, let's say on Wolf, for example, where the tender came in lower, then it would be a matter of, we're obviously not going to be borrowing the full approved budget amount. And then if it was a partially funded, so from reserves, let's say, or from debt, it's more in terms of allocating if there's cost savings once costs come in, or for the example, the tender in the case of Wolf, where should those cost savings be moved to? So for example, if there was grant funding allocated, so if we do get infrastructure funding, I would propose that we would allocate the grant funding to other sources. It is quite vague. I'm happy to remove it. I understand giving the treasurer that leeway it could be contentious. It is open-ended. So I can't think off the top of my head of a specific scenario, but I'm happy to remove it altogether if that makes you feel comfortable.
No, I was just looking for clarification around it and see how that would play out. The second point, and you kind of just alluded to it a bit there with Wolf Avenue. If we're applying for debt financing from the bank, that is approved prior to a project beginning, and then these contingencies come in, such as grant money, big fundraising campaign, whatever it might be. What then happens with the delta? So that, do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So for $1 million, we got $1 million, really only needed 800,000.
So in the case of Infrastructure Ontario, there's two types of loans with Infrastructure Ontario. There's a construction loan or kind of a completion loan. So if you think about building a house, you can get construction mortgage, so to speak. So Infrastructure Ontario will only advance you what you need as the project goes on. The other option with Infrastructure Ontario is you only borrow the debt at the end. So from a cash flow perspective, I know we are quite strong and healthy, so we can fund it from our cash. But we also need to, there's the accounting side of things of where's that cash coming from, so to speak. So we, in this case, in the case of Wool, we wouldn't be applying for, or we wouldn't be taking on a debt obligation until we actually know the full cost. So, and with the way it works with Infrastructure Ontario is we could kind of start those conversations now, and they can authorize us up to a certain dollar amount, and then we can communicate what the final construction costs were for the completion of the project. So there would be no situation that I can foresee that we would ever borrow for things that we haven't spent.
You're welcome. Further questions or comments? I just had a quick question for you about the minimum debt financing term of 5 years. I know we talked about this during the budgetary process in terms of, let's say we take on $1 million or $1.5 million and finance it for 5 years. And we have an interest rate, and then we know what our payments will be each year for those 5 years. And then we find out we find money from somewhere, and we feel a little more comfortable about getting rid of that loan before the 5 years are up. Because this minimum is in there, does that handcuff us, or are we able to pay something off early without a penalty?
In the case of Infrastructure Ontario, that was a question asked when I did go back to them and say, hey, could we pay this off sooner? And they said no. So if there are, I would say when, not if, interest rates are lower, we could potentially borrow from a financial institution. Currently, right now, with the way interest rates are, they're not as competitive. Infrastructure Ontario does provide us lower rates. So if we were to lock in for 5 years, in your scenario with Infrastructure Ontario, they have no means, or there's no get out clause or early repayment, if you think about it, in terms of a personal mortgage per se. So that's a no with Infrastructure Ontario, but it's not a no if we were to go with a financial institution, as far as I'm aware. But if we do find money, I'm sure we could spend it on other things.
Any further questions or comments? Okay, so yeah, the policy looks great, and again, it's great to have a framework and a guideline for us moving forward in terms of debt financing. And I guess in terms of what we have tentatively approved for this year, the 2 projects, I guess, as you said, we'll have to wait until the projects are completed and we know the actual dollar value that was spent. And then that'll come back to council in terms of how many years and what interest rate and what we'd like to do in terms of financing that debt. Is that correct?
Correct, yes. There'll be a separate bylaw required for each loan entered into with Infrastructure Ontario, assuming it will be with Infrastructure Ontario.
Okay. So if there are no further comments, then I need a motion to approve. Moved by Councillor Root, seconded by Councillor Donovan, that the proposed bylaw attached to this report be approved as presented at the next meeting of council. And just before I finish, was there going to be an amendment, or do you want to take that out, or did we decide we're just leaving it as is? Everybody's good as is? Okay. So as presented at the next meeting of council. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried. Okay, next we have FIN-09-2024 mobile device contracts. Christine again, you've been busy.
I did a lot before I left for vacation. This, to simplify things, is, again, from a modernization, and I've heard from staff, another pain, I'll use the term pain point, as it relates to it's mobile devices as a whole, because it's not just cell phones. The fire department does have tablets for being out in the field that require data. So it's mobile devices as a whole. as it relates to the town of Petawawa. Currently, we don't have a corporate contract with either Rogers or Bell, so that we are paying market rates. We are not taking advantage of government rates. So not only from that perspective, from a dollar saving perspective, the administration of, I'll call it 50 plus individual contracts is quite cumbersome and also costly too as well. So with the proposed contracts, we are able to monitor consumption as well as take advantage of some just administration. And there was a question too with respect to bring your own devices as well. So it'll give us different options and different plans based on the usage of each device. So I do want to point out there is a correction in the financial implications point. So it's not $10 a month, it's actually $50 a month for each Bell mobile device. And so what I'm proposing too as well is that, again, I like Teresa's crawl, walk, run analogy. We're going to start with a small pool of cell phone contracts that are currently not under the 2 or 3 term currently, so we can actually lock them into these prices immediately. And as devices start to come up for renewal, and we can even kind of play Bell and Rogers against each other in terms of further negotiations too as those contracts come up. So not only are we saving time and addressing some pain points, but we're saving money on an annual basis too as well.
Okay, questions on this report? Deputy Mayor Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is great. And just a question with respect to those of us on the council, we have our own cell phones. So if we are looking at wanting to renew or upgrade, we should actually be doing it within this scope as opposed to ourselves, or are we outside of that scope as of yet?
Currently, the devices that we have kind of in scope for moving to these contracts, council is not in the first wave, so to speak. But again, it'll be a conversation with each device as it comes up for renewal, or each user, excuse me. But as Mary alluded to, not all of the staff, but there have been quite a few staff members hired within the last couple of months that will be assigned new phones. So those will kind of be in the first wave, so to speak. So it'll be brand new for us to work out the process and the onboarding and the management of the devices. Thank you.
Just to follow up on the deputy mayor's question. So we all have our own phones and our own individual phone plans. Could this mean eventually that we would have a corporate phone as well as our personal phone, or is the option going to be available for us to bring in our personal phone, keep that number, and just put it under the corporate plan?
The option will be given to the individual what they would like to do. If they would like to have 2 separate phones, and any company phone, so to speak, that is used for town business is subject to freedom of information requests. So if there's work happening on the phone, then it is in scope as well. So from that perspective, you have that option, but that's the asterisk to be made aware of.
So thanks for bringing that up. That was going to be my next question in terms of liability, and you mentioned the freedom of information. Would it be in our best interest, all of us who are, we have a private life and we also have a corporation responsibilities, would it be in our best interest to have a corporate phone and a private phone and keep those 2 entities separate?
I'm not a lawyer, but I'll let Scott.
Thanks for that, Your Worship. The predominant thought out there is that it's better to separate the 2. It's just having, sorry, I got two voices going on. I had one's delayed. Sorry. Yeah, no, listen, most of the conversations I've been involved in on this issue with other CAOs and other municipalities is that it's better to separate your two lives. I know it sucks to have to carry two phones, but it's something you should probably consider for privacy's sake. Absolutely. Now, I'm not an expert on FOI or NFIPA. My colleague, the Director of Legislative Services, will deal with any FOI requests we get. But as the officer responsible for those requests, he would lock out anything that would be of a private nature. So if you had an FOI request come in that requested information specifically from your phone, meaning texts or call logs, anything of a private nature would be omitted from the results of that FOI search. But just be aware that the FOI officer would have to search your phone and sort through that information.
I guess the other line of questioning along what we're talking about here is all of us have our own personal emails and all of us have corporate emails. And sometimes those lines get blurred and you send something out in your personal email that's work related and you send something personal on your work related email. So I'm wondering when those lines get blurred like that and there's a freedom of information request, you're saying that, the personal stuff is going to be blocked, but sometimes that may be difficult to do. So in the end, it's probably, in terms of protecting ourselves, it's probably best that we had a corporate phone with a corporate email, and that's the only thing you did business on. And you kept your private phone to yourself to do your own individual.
Just to be clear on that point, we would not search your personal email, right? Just as with the phones, and it's really rare that we would get an FOI request that would be specific to whatever texting have been done through that is business related. But in regards to getting that information, we would have to search through the specific function on the phone that would allow us to see the call logs or to see texts, right? With certain individuals that might have been identified through the FOI request. FOI requests have to be very specific for us to start looking for that information, is my understanding. But just be aware that, yes, you would be in the hands of the FOI officer that would have to search through that information. Look for it.
Councillor Kern.
Thank you for your service. So having the whole FOI thing aside, having two devices immensely complicates things. And as the mayor pointed out, probably all got Gmail accounts and Petawawa.ca accounts, and then somebody winds up using your Gmail address, and it all of a sudden, all email that you're getting from this one particular person is coming to your Gmail address. You tell them to try and, well, could you update your contacts? And well, they don't know how to do that, so it never happens. And it would just be a big messy mess.
CAO.
Through the chair, let's put this in perspective. I think we're making this much more complicated than we need to. I'm just making you aware of what the issues are. We've had all of 4 FOI requests this year, and last year we had 0. So that puts in perspective how many we actually get. So we would hope that level remains low, because frankly, we've got nothing to hide, no major controversies at this point in time. But we just want to make you aware that issue is there, and it's something for you to consider as we move into new corporate accounts and talk about having to carry second phones or not carrying second phones.
Councillor Gunn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just an observation, when I was in my last business position, you can get cell phones that have 2 SIM cards that you can put into the same phone, and you can flip between your private SIM card and your work SIM card. Just for information.
That is a good point. With the hiring of our IT coordinator, we will be strengthening the IT controls on the actual devices as well with MFA or multi-factor authentication, as well as Microsoft device management tools as well. So from a security perspective too as well. We'll be bringing more policies forward.
Councilor Roos.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Christine, thanks for bringing this forward. I've been all over this for the last couple of terms here and appreciate that. And yes, there's going to be some very good savings here for the town. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments? So I guess putting all of our chatter aside here, it's a good thing for the corporation to amalgamate all these phone contracts and systems and get it all under one or two contracts. And as Councilor Root said, it'll save the town money in the end and simplify the role of the treasurer and accounting clerk and anybody who's involved in tracking down all of these different cell phone plans. Okay, so if there are no other questions, I need a motion to approve. Moved by Councilor Driscoll, seconded by Councilor Coutu, that staff be authorized to enter into contracts with Bell Canada and Rogers Communications on behalf of the town of Petawawa for mobile devices. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.
Next, we have legislative services. Monthly activity report for March 2024. Colin.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Service, to council, before you is my monthly legislative services report for March. This report would have been delivered last month, but we didn't have all the information in time for the animal control, so I held off bringing it forward until this evening. So I'll just highlight on a few brief key points. Under animal control, there was two complaints of barking dog, one on the wrench end and one on Bedard, and verbal warnings were issued for both. And we had two cats that were trespassing on Dutch Street, and also verbal warnings were issued. Turning over the page, under parking enforcement, we had 44 parking infraction notices issued in the month of March. And under transient trader, we had granted Bell Canada the transient trader license to operate for the month of March, from March 18th until April 17th. And I think I'll be bringing forward in my next report for next month another request from Bell Canada as well. Under burning, we had 3 provincial offensive notices issued and found guilty on March 11th. Property standards, we had a resident on Portage Road and be issued a property standards warning for his yard maintenance and upkeep. And under Commissioner Vols, you'll see we had 24 services requests for the month, and we listed them in the diagram there. And as well, we had 2 licenses issued for the month for marriage licenses, and the revenue is attached as well. I'd be happy to take any questions from council should they have any.
Any questions on the monthly report? Councilor Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for curiosity's sake, so when they give a verbal warning for, say, dog barking, is it like 2 warnings and you're getting a fine, or is it based on what they see when they get there?
Yeah, they usually start with a verbal warning, they'll go to a written, and then they'll issue a ticket on the 3rd.
Further questions on the report? In terms of excessive excrement, where's the line? How do we know it's excessive? I'm just kidding.
I have no answer to that.
Any other questions on the report? Then I need a motion to accept the report. Moved by Councilor Coutu, seconded by Councilor Carmody, that council receives the legislative services monthly report for March as information. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried. Next, we'll go to the monthly activity report for April 2024. Colin again.
Thank you, Mayor Service. Through you and to council, is my April report is before you. And again, I'll just touch on some key points. We had 2 complaints of dogs walking off leash at the Fish Hatchery Park. And as Councilor Coutu's Councilor Driscoll's previous question, in this case here, there was a verbal and then a written warning issued at the same time. So under loose animals, we had cats retrieved and returned by owner in Briarwood, and the provincial offensive notice was issued to the owner, and he also had received a written warning. due to the registration of the animal, or having no registration, that is. Under parking infractions, we only had 5 parking infractions for the month, so that's a great sign. Thought I'd just touch on that since we had 44 the month before. Watering, we had an exemption provided to a resident on Jan Drive for a newly laid sod, so there was a letter sent to him to allow for the watering in the evenings and daytimes on the watering days. Garbage warning, we issued a warning for to a resident putting out their items too early for the large pickup. That's to occur later on this month. And under burning, we had 3 provincial offensive notices issued to a resident on Spruce Street under the burning bylaw. The 3 notices were issued to a property owner on Summers Road, and 3 were issued to Hilda, John, and Ravenwood as well for recreational fire without a permit. And again, we just, if you're, in terms of commissioner votes, we had 10 requests for the month of April, and the diagram is there, which outlines which requests they were. And we had 8, we're getting into marriage season, so we had 8 marriage licenses issued in the month of April, and the revenue is provided there as well. Happy to take any questions, should council have any.
Questions on the April report? See none, so I need a motion to accept the report. Moved by Deputy Mayor Saffron, seconded by Councillor Coutu. The council receives the Legislative Services Monthly Report for April as information. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried. Thanks, Colin. Anything for general matters?
Yes.
I guess it's me. Okay, so those of you who've been around the council chambers know that this issue has come up several times in the past. Has it come up with you councilors? We have talked about it? Okay. Anyway, so here it is again. The CAO and I have had several meetings with Canada Post discussing this issue. I'm not going to go into the whole history of Canada Post here in the town of Petawawa, but there has been an issue with parts of our town in terms of postal code. Part of the town of Petawawa, and you see it on the attached map there. The part closest to Laurentian Valley has a K8A postal code. Just the bottom right-hand corner of our municipality. It's been in place for quite some time now. And there's a list of some of the reasons why the people who live in this area would like to see that postal code changed so that they have a Petawawa address. Some of the issues are Petawawa Post newspaper does not get delivered to those homes in Petawawa because they have a Pembroke address. For those of us who live in that area, if you've tried to order food from various food services, it is often quite confusing sometimes. Some of them will tell you to phone the Pembroke restaurant because you live in Pembroke. This one was a new one to me. Medical expense claims. If you're driving to Ottawa to the hospitals, then you put in an expense claim for medical. Because you have a K8A postal code, they measure it from Pembroke City Hall to Ottawa, which, as you know, is sometimes 15 kilometers away from where you live here in Petawawa. So that could add up over the years. Trying to switch your phones, they often won't let you get a 687 Petawawa number because you live in Pembroke. And when you're dealing with anybody online or in person at businesses with insurance, licenses, health, retailers, all that sort of thing, there's a complication when you say I live in Pembroke, but I actually live in Petawawa. It's just a confusing entity. In terms of the post office itself, you'll often get people who will put your address as Petawawa, Ontario, and it'll go to the Petawawa post office, but they can't deliver it. So they have to redirect it to Pembroke, and then Pembroke will then deliver that mail. When employers like CNL or Garrison or any other large employers in the area do a survey of their employees, many of them will live in Petawawa, but with the K8A address, that survey will show them as living in Pembroke. Same with governments or other companies doing census or marketing research. All of these homes would show up as being in Pembroke and not Petawawa. This is just a minor one, but when you say, hey Alexa, what's the weather? They give you the weather for Pembroke. I know it's not that far away, but So that's it. So Petawawa right now has over 6,000 points of call to get mail delivery. 5,500 of those are homes, 175 are businesses, 500 of those are living in apartments. If you take out the K8A area, there are actually 933 homes in that zone and 50 businesses. So if you go by an average of 3 people per household, there's probably about 2,500 plus people who live in that zone. And that's 15% of the population of Petawawa. Actually, technically, don't live in Petawawa, they live in Pembroke. Right now, this area is serviced by 2 letter carriers and 1 rural route driver in a small truck. Jeff Bluche is our local area superintendent. We don't have postmasters anymore because we have actual letter carriers. You have a superintendent. Small towns that don't have letter carriers, they would have a postmaster. So we've had several meetings over the past couple of years with Jeff Bluche and other members of Canada Post. They also have some impetus for getting this done on their side, in Canada Post side. So right now, the Pembroke Post Office is at capacity. As you know, Petawawa just put in a large addition at our post office, and they have extra capacity. So the movement of these, there would be 2 letter carriers and a rural route driver that would have to move to the Petawawa area. And both of these post offices would benefit. Pembroke because there's no room anymore, and Petawawa because we do have the room. There's a lot of cost savings to Canada Post. They have things that are called gray relay boxes. So they'll deliver a whole bunch of mail to these boxes, and then the letter carrier will come and pick those up. Some of those can be removed if these postal carriers came to Petawawa. So they would actually take those boxes out. They wouldn't have to pay for the snow removal contracts for these boxes. Behind the OPP detachment, that little subdivision and area in there, all of those parcels right now are delivered by subcontracting. And if this postal code change was made, they would all be delivered from the Petawawa location. Right now, Canada Post pays a taxi driver to deliver a postal carrier all the way from Pembroke to service that area here in Petawawa. And if this change was made, it would be done out of the Petawawa location. They wouldn't need to drive this individual by a cab. So the implications, the postal code would be changed to reflect this area as being part of the town of Petawawa. So all of the residential and businesses in this K8 area would actually need to physically change their address. The street address would stay the same. What would change is it would say Petawawa, Ontario instead of Pembroke, Ontario, and you would have a new K8H postal code. Not sure what the last 3 numbers and letters would be. Canada Post has indicated to us in all of our meetings that there would be no cost to the town of Petawawa, that all costs associated with this postal code change would be borne by the Canada Post Corporation. They would provide a 1-year address forwarding program to every address within this postal code area. So there'd be no cost to the individuals or businesses in this area as well. So what we're looking for is direction from council to move ahead with the K88 postal code change in conjunction and collaboration with Canada Post. So I'll read you the resolution so we know what we're after here. That the town of Petawawa requests that Canada Post move forward with a postal code change in the K88 address area of the municipality as soon as possible. This will bring about a postal code change in the affected area and a change from a Pembroke address to a Petawawa address for all properties in the affected area. The reason we put in as soon as possible is Canada Post, the department that deals with all these postal code changes across the country, have a schedule and a list of what's being done in 2024 and also for 2025. So they asked us actually in our resolution to be a little forceful, let's say, so that we may get ourselves put on the 2024 list, but definitely get put on to the 2025 list. So that's why it says as soon as possible. We thought about some stronger language, but we wanted to be kind of neutral. Okay, so I'll take any questions should you have any. Councillor Kern.
Thank you, Mayor Service. So generally speaking, I'd be in favor of this. but then again, I'm not impacted one way or the other. So I know in the past, some of the issues have been from the businesses that they had issue with letterhead checks, oh, you name it. I guess there was all kinds of things. So I'm just wondering, is there an intention to consult with the business community and of those 50 businesses that are affected? Maybe we should touch base with them to see how they feel about it.
Thanks for the question. So in our conversations with Canada Post, they would send out a notification of a possible upcoming change. And at that point, once everybody has been notified that this is in the works, we'll be prepared to take feedback there and then react to the feedback as it comes in.
Good.
So everybody, businesses and residents will be notified and have a chance to, and the CAO something.
Yes, through the chair, thanks. The other thing to keep in mind here, Canada Post is going to help with the transition period. So you don't have to automatically change all of your letterhead. That can be done gradually. There will be a year period where they will do mail forwarding to what your actual address will be from your old address. So they recognize that there will be a transition period necessary for not only residential people, but as well as business. And that'll give businesses and residents some time to change over everything they need to change over. So there is allowance for that, and Canada Post understands that, and we'll have a transition period to allow for that to happen.
Okay, I guess what my concern is that I'm not sure what the feedback mechanism is that the business community is going to have available to them. They're going to get this letter. I don't know what the letter is going to say. Is the letter just going to say, okay, here's what's happening and your address is going to be changed? And is there going to be some identified feedback mechanism that they're going to be able to use at that point? Or it's really our request. It's the town that's requesting this change. And should they have the opportunity to provide feedback to us? Is that feedback going to Canada Post? I don't know. I'm just kind of sticking up for the business community here, like what their concerns are going to be.
Okay, thanks. So I guess when we sit down with Canada Post and discuss the issuance of this letter, we'll make sure that it states clearly that this is a proposal and that we'll provide town contact information, Canada Post contact information, ensure that they have some avenue of providing us and Canada Post with feedback. CAO and then.
Sorry, just to clarify, it's not just us that wants this. We're asking them to do this, or the mayor is proposing that the request be made to them to make this change. They're also looking at their business and saying, we need to fix this because it affects our distribution chain and affects our operations. And it's easier for them to move those letters and that mail through this office than having it go through Pembroke now. So these changes do happen to business. Banks tell businesses all the time, you got to do it this way now, or you got to do it that way. And there's not a heck of a lot of consulting, and I feel for those businesses. Sometimes change is awkward, but one way or another, whether we make the request or whether Canada Post puts it on their radar, and they've already indicated they're going to put it on their radar. I'm assuming they'll be there to answer any questions about the transition, and that's their business because it's their business to fix the issue. But the sense I got from the conversations we've had is that they're already looking at this and saying, yeah, this is one of the address issues that we've got to repair because it's in our own business interest to have it going the other way.
Deputy Mayor Samrin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This has been in discussion for many years, and it really started with us. So I think we need to own our part in it. I think Canada Post is probably jumped on it because it also makes sense to them. However, it started with us, and I think that we need to make sure that we do our part in notifying the residents and the businesses. I just think of something as straightforward as, somebody's got your address from 10 years ago and they want to send you a sympathy card because they've heard about something and they send it outside of the year and it never gets to you. So I guess, I think we need to be really clear as to what we're doing. And I think we need to offer, as Councillor Carmody said, the opportunity for people to bring their concerns forward so that we address them. I don't know, I'm always concerned about a letter only going out, just as I am sometimes often concerned about it just being put on our website. So I think we've got to, I don't think that this is, I don't know if this is a good idea or a bad idea for our residents or for our businesses. It may be a very good idea for the majority, but some may have very particular concerns. And I think we need to make sure that we do our diligence in making sure that we offer that opportunity to listen and hear directly from them. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? CAO?
Just on that point, if I may, then we will have to set aside budget and HR resources or human capital to be able to undertake something like that. So just be aware of that when you're thinking of us undertaking this. I would suggest that if that is the thought, then we'll have to have some discussion about what the cost is to us to undertake that, if that's what you want. And we can probably bring back a report on that, where we find the time and the resources to do it.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Coutu.
Thank you for service. Just to say, it seems like there's going to be friction either way. And to me, the common sense approach is to put all of Petawawa within the Petawawa address. And I was really shocked by the long list of reasons why that would be a good idea. And there are some big items on there that would impact people, especially when it comes to insurance payouts for travel costs, things like that. So I'm in favor of making the change. I understand that there's going to be a transition, but I think that the support that Canada Post is offering is pretty generous. And I think that the case for is stronger than the case against. That's my comment. Thanks.
Further questions or comments? So in light of our conversation that we're having, so the motion is that the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Petawawa requests that Canada Post move forward with a postal code change in the K8A address of the municipality as soon as possible. Are we wanting to add that we want to have some kind of notification, or is that understood in this whole process? Or would everybody be more comfortable if we amended this motion to include some kind of notification process? Or is everybody good with the way it's written, with the understanding that that will take place during this process? Looking for feedback. Councillor Coutu.
Thank you, Mayor Service. The process that you outlined seems to include that notification. So I would expect we would hear from businesses or individuals who are strongly opposed as part of that process. So I'm comfortable with the resolution as is.
Councillor Kernan.
If the intention is to send a notification in any case, then it really doesn't make any difference if we add it on a resolution, right? We could add it, but may as well, because it's going to happen, right? So, add it.
Okay. So Colin, I'm just going to put it in at the end, I guess.
Yep.
Area of the municipality as soon as possible. You want to help me with the language here? As soon as possible.
And that notification to area residents and businesses is conducted prior, I don't know.
Notification of area.
Here, just if I may. Your worship, I would suggest that that we shorten this up a bit and tack on to the end of the first. I would just get rid of the second sentence and basically state that that the town of Petawawa requests that Canada Post move forward with a postal code change in the K8A address area of municipality as soon as possible, and ensure that all businesses and residents are notified well ahead of time. that sufficient? Or do you want it stronger?
Let me write this one down.
Or that a proper amount of time is allotted to notify residents and businesses of the coming change?
Deputy Mayor Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The part that's missing for me is the consultation or the feedback. A notification is one thing, we're doing it,
Okay.
but that we want to hear from our businesses and residents that have got concern, if they've got concerns, so that we can make sure that we address them, reassure them, do whatever we do to move this forward. I'm not disputing that. I don't think it's a bad idea to move forward. What I need is to know that we're consulting or we're allowing for feedback.
Okay, somebody write this down. Okay, so at the end of this, and ensure that notification of all businesses and residential homes will be undertaken and feedback accepted. Or considered. Feedback considered, how's that sound? As soon as possible, and ensure that notification of all businesses and residential homes will be undertaken and feedback considered. Everybody good with that? We need some work on the wordsmithing. Councillor Kern.
I would suggest something like the first part that you just said, and then a mechanism for feedback be provided to residents and businesses. And the feedback, and then the feedback be considered. And part of the reason I find that so important is that this change has the potential to cost some of the businesses out there real money. Change. I mean, we're spending their money. We're forcing them to spend dollars, and we don't know how much that is. Perhaps some of them have stationery bought 25 years in advance or something. I don't know.
Your worship, if I may.
CAO.
Yeah, so here's my suggestion, that the town of Petawawa requests that Canada Post move forward with a postal code change in the K8 or K8A address area of the municipality as soon as possible, and notify and consult with affected businesses and residences. Okay, there you go. Okay. Get that?
Yeah. For the third time.
Councillor John.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the two halves of that contradict each other. The first part is we're doing it. The second part, we'll ask what they think about it. But we're not really, their feedback will not impact the decision because the decision is listed as soon as possible to happen. Just my observation.
Deputy Mayor Simon.
I wonder if we need to approach this from the route of notification first, that this is what is being proposed. Please provide your feedback. And then once we receive feedback by such and such a date, then we go on to stage 2.
So that the council of the corporation of the town of Petawawa notify and consult with affected businesses and residents in the K8A address area of a possible postal code change in collaboration with Canada Post. Or really,
No, it sounds not being consultation.
ripping this apart.
So I would suggest probably we're in the position of you either, because what Canada Post asked us to do was provide them with strong request to undertake the work if we're going to pass a resolution. I would suggest right now the question you need to ask yourself is whether or not you want to support a resolution to make a change, postal change in that area, or whether you don't want to make the request at all and let Canada Post follow its process. Because now we're telling Canada Post how to conduct its own business, right? Which we wouldn't do with any other business. Well,
They're telling us how to do ours.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying that that's where we're at right now. So so we're saying basically what I'm hearing is you're saying you want to request that they take a look at this, at a possibility of changing the K8A postal code to a Petawawa postal code and consult with residents and businesses beforehand before implementing any changes. That's
Okay,
what
so
I've heard.
I see what everybody's saying here. So I think, and this is just what I'm thinking here. This resolution was based upon a request by Canada Post that it was to be worded strongly so that we could get in the queue. So that's why they asked us to move forward with this, is to get in the queue. While we're in the queue, which could be a year and a half from now, while we're in that queue waiting for this to happen, we can notify and consult the affected residents. And because we're in the queue, doesn't mean we have to stay in here. If there's a giant uproar from businesses and residents, they don't want this done, then we can come back to Canada Post and say, hey, listen, I know we're in the queue, but we've sent out notification and the feedback we're getting back is not favorable, so take us out. And if the feedback we get is favorable, then we're in the queue. But if we take a year to do this notification and wait for feedback and then decide it's going to be 2026. So this is just my thinking. Let's get in the queue. Let's notify the residents that this is a possibility. Take the feedback and then at least we're in the queue. And we can stay in or we can get out based on the feedback we're hearing. Councillor Kerman.
I'd rather do it right than do it as soon as possible. And I'd rather do it the way that we do business and not do it at Canada Post's behest and the way that they do business. And so yeah, I think what we should do is consult first and then approach Canada Post and say, okay, we've got a mandate from the people who are affected here. So go ahead and do it. Or we've got the thumbs up or the thumbs down.
Deputy Mayor Sadler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the way we generally do business, and I don't want to I'm not proposing that we hire a consultant to do this. That's not what I'm proposing, but that we consult. And we've done this in many ways. We've got a tax bill coming out in the not too distant future that could have some information in that tax bill, that we're going to have a public meeting with respect to this, or any number of ways that make sense. My concern is that we want to make sure that we are seen to be getting our feedback before a decision is made. And I'm concerned that by making a decision to go forward tonight with that strongly worded, basically sends a mission that, you know, that we've got our path, and thanks, we'll take your feedback, but we've got our path. And I don't want that message to be sent to our business community or our residents on this issue, or quite frankly on any issue. So I'm in favor of doing our due diligence first and then getting into the queue. I don't think it's going to take 6 months or a year. It shouldn't. We do a lot of things in relatively short order. So anyways, those are just my thoughts to support what Councillor Carmody said.
CAO.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is you'd like to provide direction to staff to formulate a campaign to gather feedback from affected residences and businesses within the K8A postal code on whether or not they're in favor of having the address changed, or the city, or the town pursuing a change in their postal code of Canada Post. Is that what I'm hearing? Sure. So that would probably be your next step. My suggestion or advice.
Okay. So we have a motion that's, I guess we're changing completely. And we're just gonna, so it won't be a motion, it'll just be direction to staff, or you want a motion to direct?
I would suggest that it's just direction to staff to formulate a plan to survey the residents of the affected postal code area to see whether or not they're in favor of pursuing a change and what their concerns might be if they're not.
As soon as possible,
That's simply.
just like the strong language in our
We-
original motion.
So just to be clear, we'll bring back a report of, I don't want to report you to death, but we'll bring back a report on how we would do that and what the costs are involved in, because we're talking about taking budget to undertake. And I'm not saying about consultants, but that there is a human resource component to this as well as materials or cost to it as well. So we want to keep that in consideration, so you know what the financial implications are of doing such.
I'm thinking we should also let Canada Post know that we're moving ahead with this consultation process first.
Yeah, we can advise them of what council's wishes were on this issue and that,
Okay, and also in the conversations we had with them, notification was part of their process, which they were putting the bill for, but I'm not sure they want to participate financially in our notification consultation process. But I guess it's a discussion we can have with them and say, this is what we're thinking before we pass our motion. Are you involved, or is this all on us?
yeah, we can ask them, but they, just to be clear, what I heard from I think it was the regional vice president, that they've already done this in other communities across the province. So then they have put financial resources into it. Whether or not they put financial resources into a consultation campaign, that would be something that we'd have to run up the flagpole with them and see, but it's something they would support. Yeah.
Okay, so what we're doing here is providing direction to staff to undergo a notification and consultation process with affected businesses and residents of the K8A area as soon as possible.
If that's your wishes, yeah, I'm just saying that we'll bring a report back to you on what that's gonna cost and what it's gonna look like.
Okay, we don't need to vote, we're just going.
Just give us direction, yeah.
Lots of nods going on, and keeping in mind that should we go through this process, in the end, Canada Post could decide to act on their own, regardless of what we say or do or tell them. So just keep in mind that as well. Okay, so staff has direction. We're all good? That took a lot longer than I thought. Okay, next we're going into a closed meeting. So I need a motion to go into close. Moved by Councillor Coutu, seconded by Councillor Donovan, that the meeting be closed pursuant to section 239, paragraph 2, paragraph K of the Municipal Act 2001 S.O. 2001 C.25 to discuss a position, plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or on behalf of the municipality or local board. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried. We're going into close.